kind of what our values of a liberated counseling psychology might look like. So we're going to pull up our slide deck and just want to welcome you, and hopefully you're, I don't know, having another cup of coffee or a nice cup of tea, or you're hydrating, you're stretching, you're taking care of your body while we're together. We know for some of you, this is at the end of a long day. Some of you, it's in the middle of your day. I'm looking at you, Brian Kim, or I'm always like, what hour is he on? I know it's early. It's a lot earlier than us. But wherever you are in your day, we're just so excited for you to be here. And I just want to really celebrate that we're coming together to really do this work collectively about, we all got raised in a counseling psychology discipline where we're like, hey, these are the values. And then we memorized them for comps. And then we they guided like our whole careers. And then maybe we had wonderings about if those values were actually being enacted in our everyday lives, or if they were really the ones that were right for our time. So we're going to jump into all of that as we go throughout today. As we go to the next slide, and thank you, Mel, our next SCP president, for driving the slides today. None of us would be here today if it wasn't for our president, Siobhan. So I just want to hand it over to her for a moment to just kind of tell us why this presidential initiative was created.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Hello, SCP. It's really good to see everybody here. Thank you for taking the time out to join the second webinar. This has been a part of the presidential initiative around dismantling anti-Black racism with unapologetic boldness. And specifically, this one is about defining and redefining our values. Like Annalise already said, we came into counseling psychology, and I'll speak for myself. I came into counseling psychology really for the values that I believe that this field has, and that I felt like we really embrace. And I think over time, it has been a really interesting and unique experience of unpacking those values and trying to understand how we live them out, what they are, what they really mean for us, how they have changed over time or how they need to change over time. And specifically, as we, over the past few years, even I think really leading with Annalise's presidential initiative around liberation, I think as a division, we've really been trying to move towards liberation, move towards being an anti-racist organization. The past few years, we've really been focusing on dismantling anti-Black racism. And so I was telling the presidential initiative group that's all working together earlier today, I was saying, this work is not starting this year, but I think that what we've been doing this year is trying to see how the work that we have been developing really sits within our division and what that truly means for our values and how we want to define them. And so I'm really grateful to this group for taking this on and really working on this. Dr. Annalise Singh, our former past president, Dr. Mel Wilcox, who is our president-elect, so excited for her, and also Dr. Della Mosley, who's not with us today, but has been a significant contributor to this, and then Kaylin Terrell, who is our most amazing social justice graduate assistant, who has been supporting this group and also the other initiative that we have. So I'm really grateful to them, and I'm grateful to all of you for being here, and I'm just looking forward to our discussion today.
Thank you, our most amazing president. And we know that you are gearing up for APA, and just want to really give you a shout out from us as a group that, thank you for your leadership, your vision. It's just been so awesome to see SCP transform and grow. And we know you're in the hot seat right now and that you said yes to this thing, but wow, just thank you for just all the ripple effects. We're really feeling it, and it's inspiring. So thank you. So again, my name is Annalise Singh. I use she and they pronouns, and Della is on sabbatical. We are celebrating that. We encourage you to think about what sabbatical life might look like for you. We're going to tell on her a little bit. She was trying to join tonight. We were like, oh, hell no. We love you and we want you here, but we don't want you here. And also want to turn it over to Mel.
Yeah, absolutely echoed. Hi everyone, I am Mel Wilcox, she, her. Glad to be here with you all tonight. And yeah, and this is about not only what are our values, but a major part of Dr. Maura LeBon's initiative is how do we live our values, right? And we're really trying to take that very seriously. So that includes for all of you all tonight as well. Whatever you need to do to take care of yourselves, we're just so glad that you're here. And as someone noted that like your camera is off, please, like whatever makes you all most comfortable and helps you take care of yourselves tonight. This is about actually living these values, not just putting them on paper. Thanks so much again for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Mel. And, you know, we also have been working, you know, there's a core group, but we've been working with this larger group too. So we just really wanted to give a shout out to Brittany Bridges, Jaleesa Hardwick, Jennifer Holsapel, Terrell Taylor, Kaylin Terrell, and Ryan Willard. Thank you all so much. Some of you are here today and you can say hi in the chat. Just, it's been amazing to work with you all. And Kaylin, just thank you for all the support of our team. So as we go throughout tonight, what you'll see is that I'm going to kind of go over a little bit of where we've been in this process. And we're going to talk a little bit about theory. We're going to show a timeline that we showed in webinar 1. We do have a recording for webinar 1 if you didn't get to see it. Kaylin is going to talk about like some of the work that came out of our last time we had together. And then Mel is going to lead us through our next questions, you know, kind of commenting on like the values that we kind of identified within the work that was done in our first gathering. So really, I love this slide, Mel, because in April, we did come together to dream. And so as we go to the next slide, we were dreaming because we knew that anti-Black racism, as Siobhan was sharing, is not only real, it's like in us, it's in our profession. We knew that critical consciousness about anti-Black racism is really critical. I'm not going to go over every single one of these slides in detail, but just so you can see the pebbles we were dropping in the pond. If we start with anti-Black racism as our core, we go to critical consciousness, then the next slide, you know, we've got to think about, there's some theories out there that really tell us that anti-Black racism, we're not going to debate about that. It's real, you know, interest convergence happens, you know, with anti-Black racism is an everyday impact and effect and outcome, driving all these mental health inequities. And, you know, when white folks agree and non-Black folks of color are like, oh yeah, let's talk about it. That's usually when we start doing work, but it doesn't mean the other gift of critical race theory is that, you know, we've had Black scholars and activists doing this liberation work for a long time. Last time Mel talked a lot about critical psychology, where, you know, we're trained as counseling psychologists, but how much were we actually critiquing our own profession? And what does it feel like when we do that? When we actually take a look at our original quote unquote values and we start to tear them apart and wonder if there's some things that we should throw away or keep or tweak or do an overhaul with, we might have some feelings about that, but it's part of doing the critical work. And we talked about liberation psychology, which has that aim of actually undoing the roots of affliction and really targeting the sorrows of really humanity through transformation and having liberation as an ultimate goal. The other thing we talked about is we revisited some of our quote unquote traditional values, right? There's been a lot of work about this. You can see there's so many ways to talk about our values, but sometimes we shorthand it, right? Like career. But when you start looking at the different like chapters, you know, it's growth, it's holistic and contextual, it's lots of different things. But when you look at the model training program, we talked about these 4 core values that Shiel et al. Identified in these 20 themes and 6 clusters. And you'll see them there, right? They're 4 core values, 20 themes and 6 clusters. And so as we go to the next slide, what you'll see is we put together this pop ed slide. We spent a lot of time on this in our first webinar. We won't spend as much time on this today, but above this timeline, we just kind of noted these moments since 1946 when our Division of Counseling and Guidance, the origins of SCP were founded, these conferences where a scientist practitioner model were developed. So you see the top part of these moments in counseling psych, right? But the bottom, popular education teaches us to look at kind of when things are happening in an organization, in a discipline, within the context of what's going on in the larger world. We say we care about social justice and advocacy and multiculturalism. I think we do, but let's take a look at what was going on at these different time points. You know, as SCP is founded, Jim Crow laws are fully in effect, right? You've got white women working outside of the home, Holocaust, et cetera. In the 60s, 70s, you see the freedom rides, right, happen. You see Vietnam War, the assassination of Dr. King. You've got the second counseling psych conference happening. And then in the 80s to 90s, you're getting these, you know, further kind of refinement of these counseling psychology values, assets and strengths, person-environment interactions, educational and career development, brief interactions, intact personalities, that holistic approach. But then look what's going on in the world, right? HIV and AIDS, Reaganomics, the Iran-Contra hearings. Lots of things are happening. The ADA is first passed. You've got all these different meetings as we move into the 2000 to 2010s of the Counseling Psychology Conference, or CPC, which is, it's come to be known. And each of those conferences, we were kind of refining advocacy and social justice, talking about women's empowerment, talking about multiculturalism and advocacy. You see in 2014 is where you have the Counseling Psych Model Training Program come, right? And again, you have these values that are, they're kind of, you know, you see diversity and social justice added, you see the contextual, the communitarian piece, this kind of growth towards full potential. The thing that's helpful about this timeline is you see how our values are changing, you know, and it's something for us to keep in mind as we go through tonight. But then you see as we move into the 2010s and the 2020s, I think we have a recent enough memory, although we're starting to forget, because that's what happens with anti-Black racism. You have the murder of George Floyd. You have Supreme Court rollbacks. Wow. Mel, Kaylin, Siobhan, we did this webinar in April before even more rollbacks. It's like weird to look at that bullet, and it's, you know, we knew it was getting worse, but we've also had this resistance that is happening. And so, you know, we, in 2020, we start talking about liberation as a counseling psych value. You have the launch of Academic for Black Lives. I see Dr. Paris on this webinar too. And then, you know, we kind of get to this point where it's like, what do we want to do next? And where do we want to grow next? And so that's really what tonight's webinar is about. Is first webinar was about getting this values kind of discussion started, having some reactions, as you'll see Kaylin will take us through next. And then later we'll talk about what we want those values to actually be. Kaylin.
Thank you. So this is just kind of an overview of what a lot of this process has looked like. So if you attended the last webinar, this slide might look familiar, because this was how we started out our Jam board. And we were thinking about defining, dismantling, and envisioning, and again, inviting SCP to dream of what the values of counseling psychology could look like, and also talk about where they are now. So we went through each of these slides talking about what are the core values, how are we upholding them or dismantling those, and then what they might look like in the future. As we go to the next slide on the defining values, this is a snippet of what it looked like from that webinar. We really had a strong focus on community involvement and engagement to make sure that we were bringing in everyone's perspectives of what counseling psychology is defining their values of. And to kind of start this process, we took each of these different slides, the define, dismantle, and envision, and we did kind of like a qualitative approach where we transcribed all of these out and looked for themes in order to build the basis for the draft of values that we have now. So some of the things that we initially pulled out were related to collectivism, strength-based, advocacy, and then we shifted a little bit to talk about new critical values for counseling psychology and talked about things like critical consciousness, flexibility, accountability, and healing. And we noticed during this process, that there appeared to be an overarching relational framework that talked a lot about power sharing, humility, and just bringing in the humanness of the folks that we're working with, from, early career professionals, counseling psychologists, trainees, and so on and so forth. And we're really wanting to build and work on these values through a framework that is centered in intersectionality and in liberation psychology. So in the spirit of that, we asked the other community members as well to help to create bite-sized definitions of these values. And from those definitions, and we got so much really good information from that, we were able to take those and edit the values to what we have to present to you today.
Okay, so this was kind of like a real group process, and we want to give a shout out to our larger core group who, Della, Mel, Kaylin, and myself kind of started boiling down all of what we heard, as Kaylin was just talking about. And then we were getting feedback from this larger group to be like, well, what is this really? Help us kind of flesh this out. So that's what you're about to see. And after we share this with you, Mel will kind of lead us through a breakout room. So we start getting a lot of your feedback. So this hopefully is an active webinar. So we realize we've got to read through these, but we also don't want to come from a top-down approach. So we want to just be really clear about the process. So liberation, the project of working towards liberation for all people who experience oppression, is one that frees all of us along the way. Liberation is a psychological construct, but it only has meaning when we enact it. Liberation moves us beyond the debates of whether or not we should engage in advocacy and social justice, and moves us to envision the world we want to leave behind as counseling psychologists and actively build that world.
The next value that emerged was critical consciousness. As counseling psychologists, we hold a key value of increasing our critical consciousness of how anti-Black racism and other interlocking oppressions operate in the contexts in which we work. This is accomplished through open acknowledgement, teaching of accurate history, and self-examination. With cultural humility and determination, we continuously examine our own socialized biases and collaborate with others to raise our consciousness of current and future knowledge and skills needed for practicing new ways of engaging in critical action for the collective good of ourselves, the profession, and our service to others.
Oof. And I have to tell you, as we were going through this process, there were many moments where we were taking a big old friggin' breath, because it was like, well, to imagine what a counseling psychology would look like with just those, just coming. Yeah. But you might be having other reactions, whatever reactions you are having right now. We want to hear them once we get into those groups. Collectivism. So this was a really interesting one, because we were kind of like, this isn't the collectivism we talk about in multiculturalism. Like, it's a little different. It's a little, I don't know if I would say it is advanced, but I'll read it. As counseling psychologists, collectivism is a value that continuously guides us to honor the collective groups of which we are a part. For members of our own community, peer professional communities, and the communities we serve and who serve us. We prioritize collaboration, cooperation over competition, and sharing of power. Collectivism reminds us to build pathways for those in our community who have been marginalized and provide opportunity for collective healing.
And that's another one that, for me, something that we talked quite a lot about is not only Okun's norms of white supremacy culture, but she also posits antidotes to some of those norms of white supremacy culture. And this is the collectivism one in the definition here is one where those antidotes really played a role in certainly our thinking of the definition of collectivism here and what that could look like for us. On the next slide is where you start to see some familiar terms, but where we're trying to think about them a little bit differently. So strengths-based is certainly a value that has long been considered a counseling psychology value, but we tried to provide a different kind of perspective on it, or maybe like add additional layers of perspective. So our working definition right now is counseling psychology attends to the whole person by utilizing a contextual, intersectional, and strengths-based framework of well-being. Counseling psychology welcomes, embraces, and honors the lived experiences of all people with cultural humility. Counseling psychology emphasizes a positive rather than pathological view of individuals and communities.
And, there are 9 values, right? So right now we're, in the middle of it, but you might notice there, as you get into your groups, you may think, well, this is part of this, or actually, is this saying this? That's the type of feedback we're hoping to get from you tonight. Flexibility and adaptability. On the front lines, counseling psychologists are change agents that shape shift structures through collaboration and innovation. We remain flexible and willing to adapt practices that contribute to the oppression and subjugation of marginalized peoples. And as I read these words, I just want to remind us that, they didn't come out of nowhere. They were really coming from everything Kaylin just reviewed on the Jamboard. And there was such a strong theme. Literally, it was called like shape shifting, where people were constantly innovating. And so it just, each one of these we could talk a lot about, but that one is a particularly interesting one.
The next one is accountability and repairing harm. Counseling psychology aims to identify and correct biases at the individual, institutional, and structural levels. We take accountability by acknowledging our limits and growth areas and working to address cultural missteps. We help other individuals and communities to take accountability and repair harm as well, especially harm against marginalized individuals and communities. We offer paths toward reconciliation and provide reparations where possible. What a powerful statement. Right, again, talk about really envisioning what a counseling psychology for the future could look like.
And so prevention, again, some of these are familiar. We know they're 9. So do there need to be 9? Do we need to collapse? Like, what are we doing? That's stuff we're asking you to really engage with. As counseling psychologists, we value and center prevention in our efforts to dismantle anti-Black racism and interlocking systems of oppression. We accomplish this through continuously examining how anti-Black racism has shaped the history of our discipline and through adopting primary, secondary, and tertiary preventive measures in our clinical research, training, teaching, and advocacy.
And speaking of advocacy, which, we wound up having a discussion of like, oh, do we want to keep advocacy as a value? And it was like, well, wait a second. I mean, even though we talk about advocacy a lot, publish about advocacy a lot, hopefully we engage in a lot of advocacy. To my recollection anyway, it doesn't actually show up in most iterations of our values. So this is really an attempt to own the importance of advocacy. And again, something that showed up a lot in the Jamboard. As counseling psychologists, we honor that our field has long held advocacy as a value. However, we have neglected to address how anti-Black racism and other interlocking oppressions are embedded within our own profession. Therefore, we seek to expand our definition of advocacy, where we are bold in our efforts to dismantle mechanisms, systems, and structures of injustice. As change makers, we engage in advocacy as a social justice praxis through the education and training of counseling psychologists, research, and direct advocacy at the individual, institutional, and structural levels, including local, state, and federal policy.
All right. And then we got one of the themes that just came out over and over and over in different ways was the word healing. And it was really striking for us in our process because we don't often use the H word, but it's happening all the time, or it's not happening all the time when it comes to anti-Black racism and all those foundations. So taking a deep breath as I read this one. Counseling psychology promotes the healing of oneself and others. I feel like that's a mic drop right there. We strive to be people who know ourselves. Holy shit. I mean, just to read every sentence of this is like a compass. From that knowledge, we use our power to enhance personal and collective wellness while providing individuals with space and freedom to flourish, thrive, and experience collective liberation. While counseling psychologists recognize that short-term problem management and survival is sometimes necessary, counseling psychology centers and aims to promote long-term healing and thriving.
What a one to end on, right? And so again, these are our preliminary draft values. There might be opportunities to refine, condense. We welcome that feedback. And these were come to through the community dreaming that we were fortunate to be a part of back in April. Something that we haven't looked at yet is SCP's mission. And so we also want to plant a bit of a seed about that, get you talking about that with the time that we have. And so that's sort of the second thing that's on our agenda for your breakout rooms. And so again, this is something that like what you're seeing here is the original mission. This has not been reviewed. We haven't gotten community feedback on this yet. So we're asking you to dream a little bit about what an SCP mission that's consistent with the values that we're headed toward might look like. So the current SCP mission is we cultivate a home for all counseling psychology professionals and affiliates to connect, to collaborate, and to coordinate efforts toward creating a more just and equitable world where all people and communities can thrive. Our members share a commitment to a holistic psychological perspective that is strengths-based, person and community-centered, systems-oriented, contextually aware, multiculturally inclusive, socially just, and integrative of vocational and lifespan issues. We promote this perspective within the field of psychology and in the public sector through practice, research, education and training, advocacy, consultation, and leadership. So that's our current mission. I think there's a lot of things about our values that are like the values that we've started to articulate that do clearly show up in here. But we really want to take a critical lens to this as well. You know, does this mission really reflect where counseling psychology is? If not, what's missing or what needs to be changed to really center uprooting anti-Black racism as central to our mission? So to that point, we are going to be placing you in breakout rooms here in just a few minutes. And what we're going to ask you to do, and we'll try to post this in the chat as well, is introduce yourselves, name, pronoun, a brief note about why this conversation matters to you. And we are really grateful that you're here joining us at, at least Eastern time. What's 6:30 on a Tuesday night? What led you to join us? What made this, so important to you? And then determine a note taker and a person who's going to share out from your discussion. And then we want you to spend time on the following questions while centering anti-racist and liberation perspectives. First, what are your initial impressions of the draft values? What, if anything, needs to change about the definitions that were provided? Is anything missing from the definitions, from the values in general? And then we would also like you to review the current SCP mission. What needs to change in light of these draft values and in light of the rest of your discussion? Before we conclude the breakout rooms, please be sure to thank one another for the presence, vulnerability, and unique co-creation that only you all could have made together. And please take a moment to honor that. So before we do that, I'm going to ask for some assistance in setting up the breakout rooms here. But really quickly, before we do that, I want to show you the Jamboard. For some of you, this may be familiar, and especially if you were at our last webinar, we used Jamboard last time. But if you haven't encountered Jamboard before, it can be a little bit of a new thing. So if I'll copy and paste the link for the Jamboard again, because I know that some folks have only more recently joined us. So I just put that link in the chat again. And the first thing that you're going to find on the Jamboard here is those questions that I posed, the things that we're asking you to focus on in your discussion. And so you can actually navigate back to this slide at any point. If you're like, wait, what was that third question again that we were supposed to be talking through? And then if you advance the slide, you actually have a little Jamboard orientation. This one is, it's a screenshot, and so you can't move the little elements around, but I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. But this shows you how to advance the slides, how to undo something, how to put a Post-it note in, which is how we sort of note take on these slides. And again, I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. So the biggest thing is going to be using these sticky notes, because that is how we find ways to share our ideas. So big idea about values. And then I hit save and it shows up there. So to do that, I hit this little Post-it note looking icon over here on the toolbar, and it brought up the space for me to type in my Post-it note. And then as soon as I clicked save, it put it here on the Jamboard, and I can move it around. I can make it really big because it's a big idea. I can make it small to make room for others. If I really want to get wild with it, I can spin it around. And so we're asking you to not only, engage in discussion with your groups, but, as you're working through those discussions, share the pieces of your discussion on the Jamboard. This is how we came up with our values before, and we spent a lot of time really taking in everyone's ideas and feedback. And so we look forward to doing that again. Your ideas and your feedback are so important to us. And so we have an initial impression slide, the values feedback, slide and then the SCP mission slide. So please add your thoughts, your post-it notes on the Jamboard for the discussion that you're on. So with that, we will send you all here into breakout rooms shortly. Tiffany asked if y'all will have access to the slides. That would certainly be helpful, huh? I just posted the link to the slides in the chat as well. Any other questions? Great, thanks so much. Well, Dr. Stanley, if you'd be willing to put people in breakout rooms, that would be great. And we'll see you all here shortly, and we'll be in touch about how long y'all have as well. It looks like most people are moving into their breakout rooms. Annalisa, how long do we want to give them?
A good 25 minutes.
So 7 o'clock.
Yeah. Mhm.
Let's see how many breakout rooms there are.
And Peggy and Rory, let us know if you need some help going into your breakout room.
And Dr. Stanley, would you be willing to broadcast the 7 p.m. Eastern or the 25-minute thing?
Take care of that right now.
Thank you.
Peggy and Rory, do you need some help getting into your breakout room?
What I can do is I can move them into the breakout.
Okay. I didn't know you can do that. I can't believe after like so many years of Zooming.
Helen sort of pulled out. Helen took from the current mission statement that maybe we could pare it down to say, creating a more just and equitable world where all people and communities can thrive. And that can be our mission statement. And I think from our conversation, and more so, I think, Helen, your comments in Paris, we were thinking that it has both an internal focus in terms of who we are as SCP community, but also more importantly, an external focus in terms of how we engage with others outside the society, how we shape to influence other people's lives and various different roles that we might play as counseling psychologists. So I'll offer that first part and then maybe pass the baton to Paris and Helen on the first question, because I wasn't really there for that. I came in on the tail end about the values. Helen
Sure.
says it doesn't have to be about, sorry, let me read this. Helen said it doesn't have to be that, but just thinking about using what is already provided. Thanks, Helen.
Sure. So to continue that, going back to the values, we really liked the values. We thought it really set a great frame for what people could expect from working with counseling psychologists, values for us to live up to as counseling psychologists, and as well as like, I think that can guide training programs and like being able to embody those values. And so we wrote like it as like something that is very like aspirational, that we can continuously be asking ourselves, are we living up to these values within our field? And so one of the things that we thought might be helpful is to see if we could condense the values from 9 to maybe like 3 or 5, and then maybe have some sub values, but like having those 3 or 5 core values could just be something that people could easily like communicate and talk about very quickly and surely. But then also there were some things that we felt like there was some overlap. And so on the board, we put like an example of maybe like how we could condense it to 3, and if we could put some values under these like core 3 or 5 values. So that was kind of the main thing that we gave as feedback, but we really loved the values and felt like they really, you know, spoke to what we are about as counseling psychologists.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the first group.
I can share out from our group if that's,
Thanks, Tiffany.
it was, so it was me and Lolly for most of the time, and then Catherine joined us for a little bit, from the Wi-Fi, airport Wi-Fi, so thanks, Catherine. One thing I just want, like, I was on the STIG that produced that mission statement through all of this stuff back in 2016, 2017. And so I am loving this movement to even smaller, because the mission statement that we were given in that STIG was a page and a half long. And so like through all of this stuff, like the consultants were like, really should be shorter, really should be a sentence. And the one that we have now was as close as we got to that, with trying to get to all of the different stakeholders in SCP. So I feel like, and there's certain things that I know some of like folks, we really wanted to make sure we're in there, like the socially just and the holistic and those pieces that were, it felt like this, I don't know, the movement, the shift in SCP over the years, right? And so now I love where these values are, right? How it's just, it just feels like this beautiful movement towards really fully living that. And Lolly and I think we were both sharing that, just, yes, this feels good. Just the idea of teaching and having this be what's backing me up from my professional organization just feels really beautiful. And I love how it's moving into being even more succinct and clear and just inspiring. So we love that. And a few things that we were thinking in terms of the one in the liberation, I get just a little bit more clarity in what that means. Right now it sort of refers on itself, and I have a worry that will just becomes this buzzword, or kind of we start to lose. And Lolly had the good thing of saying something like thinking of liberation as the outcome and decolonization as a process, and not mixing the two up. And so just really think, so just, I don't know what it is, I have no words to help, I just felt like it could use a little more clarity on that one. And then Lolly had really awesome thoughts on the collectivism piece that I don't think I can accurately think. So I don't know, Lolly, if you'd be okay unmuting and sharing the amazing thoughts you had on that. But thank you so much for all the work you all have done. I loved seeing all this. It's beautiful.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. Lolly, did you want to add on?
The only thing we talked about was collectivism, and the reason being collectivism can mean different things in different cultures. And sometimes, like for me, for my background, collectivism also has hierarchy. And so are we talking about collectivism as making it flattening and equaling that playing field, what that looks like, and us to be very intentional and dialoguing about what do we mean by collectivism. And like, I love the idea of empowering each other, of supporting each other, you know, and we've had some critical dialogues in Indigenous communities of what does collectivism mean when it comes to authorship. What does it mean in terms of presenting, of working with our communities? So just to really kind of open that up and talking about that and engaging in critical dialogue about what collectivism means. That's it.
Such incredibly helpful feedback. Thank you. Mary?
Well, I have to say, I love the mission statement. I like its length. I like its clarity. I thought that is the best definition of a counseling psychologist I've read in forever. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, extra props to Tiffany there. Tiffany, I didn't know that you had been a part of the rewriting STIG for that. So extra grateful to have you here tonight. And thanks so much, Mary, for that.
I think in our group, there was some discussion about you know, engaging with more people, some like having a public comment section. There was support for the values, but wanting to engage more of our membership. I think at the first webinar, there was some discussion about, you know, I think there was only 30 people, and, you know, and how to engage our membership. And, you know, I think that makes some sense. And I think that would be the following step. I don't think it has to happen here. That's how public comments work, right? You create something and then you send it out and you get the feedback. So when I look at what it says under values on our website, which is even wordier in terms of ideas. I feel like this is a huge step forward. But I do think there is some redundancy, and that we can. I love what Michael and Helen and Paris did in terms of tightening that up. I think that is really positive and exciting. So that's just some feedback from my group, and I don't know if my group, Brian and Mary already spoke, but if anybody wants to add anything else, but those were some of the points that were raised.
Yeah, Mary.
Just to add on Amy's thought there, we weren't sure, I wasn't sure if there's plans at APA to spend any time gathering more thoughts and opinions or narrowing this down or what. I mean, I came a half hour late today, so I mean, you may have already explained all this and it's redundant, but anyway.
That's a great question. Thank you. And so in terms of the information that we did cover in that first half hour, this webinar is being recorded. So, and some of it was a review of the previous webinar, but we did talk through the process of how we came to some of those values and all of the values, and that stemming from community feedback from the first webinar. But we will also be presenting at APA. Dr. Moore-Laban has a presidential initiative program Friday morning, 9 a.m. to 11, I believe. I have it on the final slide that I'll pull up. And we will be talking at that time a bit more about the outcome from this process here tonight, as well as the other group that is similarly working on it. How do we live our values out loud, part of Dr. Moore-Laban's initiative. There we go. Dr. Moore-Laban just put it in the chat. So we will be talking more at APA about this.
Yeah, and it would be wonderful to have you all come out to continue this discussion there. We really do want this to be a process where the SCP community is really a part of it. We've been having a lot of discussion about, you create something, you want feedback on it, you create more, you want feedback on it, but we also don't want it to be just we create, we get feedback, we create, we get feedback, but really we're creating together. And so each of the moments and opportunities to do this together are really crucial to the process. And it is a longer process, so this isn't the end of it. But I think the presentation at APA and that time together would be really helpful to join if you're able to. And if I could also just share one thing that came in my group, I was meeting with Matt and Lynette, and we were talking about the fact that, so one, also really appreciating and loving the values and where we're going, and seeing a lot of overlap with the values that we have had, that feels like there's continuity, but that we're also really moving forward with defining our values in new ways. And so we were loving that. And we were also thinking about, and someone else, a different group that wasn't us, put a comment in the board about different levels, individual, community, and systemic. And that had come up for us as well, and looking at the values and saying, like, even when we talk about healing oneself, are we talking about ourselves as myself as Siobhan, or are we talking about ourselves as SCP? And we were kind of talking about the fact that it's some of both, right? Like when I saw that statement, I love that, healing oneself, because I was saying to our group, when we're not healed, we're hurting other people, right? As supervisors, as clinicians, as administrators, as leaders, as faculty, as all the things that we do, if we're not having that our own healing, we have the potential for hurting other people. But the same is true for us as an organization, right? So how are we also healing as an organization? Each piece of the values, like how is that individual, and then how is that also the community and the systemic levels?
Yeah, I noticed that comment on the Jamboard too, and that's such helpful additional context information. I think that's a really important point. Thank you, Madam President. Who would like to go next? I see some folks who I don't think have reported out yet.
Report out on behalf of our group. So I was with Stuart and
Stewart and Fahara. And that was part of the comments that we talked about, was really thinking about the different levels of the values. And another piece that we kind of talked about that wasn't really hit on yet was thinking about changes to group level behavior and what does it look like to really think about the values and think about working with groups to also contribute, or working with others, so that like pairing alongside and not thinking about the work that we're doing in isolation, just as SCP, but also working with others for like collective change. And then we were having some really intentional discussion around like just the action oriented pieces. So as we think about defining the values, are we actually going to be in position to do the work to live out the values, and really having that as an intentional like conversation, as opposed to, constructing these values and then not being able to actually do the work. So we were having some conversations about how that could be like integrated, or just thought about and defining the values, and then even in the portions of like editing the values and the mission statements. But a lot of what we've talked about has kind of been shared through the other groups, lots of just synergy among the values as they've listed, and a few areas of consideration for condensing or editing the values have been added to the Jamboard as well.
Thanks so much, Trill. More great feedback and reactions. I think that is, I think each group has reported out. I'm trying to see on my screen. I didn't see how many breakout groups there were, but it looks like.
Can I give one more brief plug, Mel, for the APA convention, because I think that last point Terrell was such a good one. The other part of the initiative this year is actually living our values out loud. So it's about this piece of defining and redefining them. And then the second part is living them out loud. And so we are going to have conversation there about what does that mean? Like, what would it look like across different settings to be living these values on a day-to-day basis? And what ways are we not that we need to, which also might inform how we then keep editing and thinking about the values that we have here. But I just want to really emphasize and uplift that point that you're making, that is crucial, that not only we have values as SCP, but that we're truly showing those in all aspects of what we do as counseling psychologists.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And I appreciate you stepping in. Obviously, I'm losing my voice a little bit tonight, so my apologies for my unusual pithiness. Usually I say way too much. Tonight it's the opposite problem. So thanks, Siobhan. Stuart, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks. Just to dovetail what Siobhan was saying, I think we're living in critical times now, because I know in my lifetime, I've never seen such political and social oppression in all of my lifetime. And, it's playing out across different states in different ways. So these values are definitely going to conflict with a number of states' laws that are already passed or being brought up in legislations around the country. And so I think there'll be, what's that look like then to have SCP as an organization advocating that all counseling psychologists engage in activities that within certain states, may be difficult or maybe problematic for the persons.
Well, and it's not, Stuart, in addition to what you're saying to those environments, just even within counseling psychology, nowhere in those values does it say anything about science. Right. And there's going to be people that feel like that's a problem. Do you know what I mean? So there are things that are even within our own community that will be important for us to discuss. Right. Because, to me, what we're talking about, our values, is foundational. And then the things that we do, like science, like practice, will have to come out of those values and influence those values. And that's how we should think about it. But I don't know that everyone will necessarily view it that way.
Annalise?
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're bringing up, Stuart and Amy, what you're saying. I think it's kind of the elephant in the room, right? And it's why that pop ed slide just blew our minds. Like, you see the disconnect between values and disciplines and what's going on in the world. And so, and we know that, folks who didn't attend tonight or other webinars or who aren't engaging, we know that there may be resistance there. Some of that resistance is going to be within SCP. We need to be honest about that. I mean, when you look at the founding of our discipline, y'all know the things that are made up about our discipline, and who are counseling psychologists and we're like fake clinical psychologists. Y'all have heard this. I was like really like very unaware and naive of that. My master's was in professional counseling, so I was like shocked when I heard all that stuff. But when you look at kind of the founding, not everyone was on the quote unquote same page, even with practice or this kind of intact personalities language. I mean, the values we lived into it. And I think goes back to what Siobhan was saying about that other part of her presidential initiative. And, I think there's a presidential initiative number 2 Siobhan has, where, folks are working on these kind of case books and case studies of like what it looks like to undo anti-Black racism in the real world. I think that type of work will help us deal with the BS that we're seeing with state laws and certain things, because they don't really care about what's actually not only science, but they don't want it to be undone. But case studies, like showing the practices, policies, procedures, and practices, we just have to get more authentic and real about the work. And we know that social justice and advocacy has given us a little bit of cover to say it's important and actually not do it, not do the case studies, not look at where it's actually showing up. So I think, having that conversation about it's probably with I always get the words and the acronyms wrong. I'm looking at Lolly, I'm looking at Amy, I'm looking at Tiffany, like our counseling training directors.
CPTP.
Thank you.
Always here for the alphabet soup.
Yes, thank you. I live in a land of way too much alphabet soup. So I mean, really kind of being in tight alignment with those orgs to have that conversation, Stuart, and doing a session around that so we can address that just full frontal.
Yeah, I appreciate everything that everyone was just talking about. And Amy, I had a similar thought when I was re-reviewing the values earlier that, there are times in our previous values where the things that we do sort of became framed as values. And I think here, unintentionally, but implicitly, we've sort of separated out like what are the values that are foundational to the things that we do, science, practice, whether it's therapy, assessment, even in some ways advocacy, although of course we would argue that that's still a principle or a value, but like you said, not everyone may see it similarly, that they should necessarily be separated out. But I think that, regardless, these are guiding values, right? They speak to the philosophy behind counseling psych. The conflict is going to be how we live those values out loud, which means what an important time for us to be talking about how we live those values out loud, right? And I think shying away from the fight isn't going to make it go away. It's certainly not going to help us advance toward justice. I'm co-chair of a working group in APA on equitable admissions in graduate psychology education. I don't know if anyone's been paying attention to the Supreme Court lately, but this is also quite a time to be talking about equitable admissions in higher education. But, certainly to my mind, having these values, at least for me as a counseling psychologist, are values, in the ballpark of where we're talking about as further support for how we approach that work. It helps us engage in the fight better. It's not like we're going to back off of the importance of equitable admissions, right? Instead, we're going to have hard discussions about how do we advance toward more equitable admissions in the context of the fights that we're up against, whether that's a particular state. I'm in Georgia, it can be challenging. Split my time historically with Florida, so that goes without saying. And then obviously nationally, we're dealing with some really intentional long-term fights that are not going to go away. And so just really grateful for everyone's continued dreaming tonight in terms of, how do we not only apologetically, own the values of counseling psych, but to the second half of Dr. Moore-Laban's presidential initiative, how do we truly live them out loud? And I think it's important to recognize that that's not going to be an easy thing for us to do, right? In this era where it's more important than ever that we live those values out loud. The reason that we have to have these discussions is because it's going to be increasingly turbulent to do so. And so it's just so important that we engage from that reality, you know. Yes, I know it's 7:25. We'll be coming up to the end of our time here in just a few moments, but other thoughts before we move toward concluding for the day? And Stuart made the point that the ethics code revision, the draft of that will be released in the coming months, and that there's a lot of overlap in the draft ethics code as well, and our sort of draft SCP values right now, and lots of counseling psychologists on that task group and leading that task group. So good to see some synergy there as well. Let me share our final slide here, which is really going to be a reiteration of join us at APA.
And maybe while you're pulling that up, I'll just say that, as we kind of move forward, I think there are important questions we need to engage. There's important feedback we want to keep getting. And then there's kind of like the quiet resistance that can be there within ourselves and within our community that I hope we can continue to name. Again, that pop ed side gives us kind of a gut check. If we think about undoing anti-Black racism, if we really do our deep study around what that means, we have to transform as a discipline to authentically do that. And then, all the connections to like all the interlocking oppressions are there as well. And, those moments of liberation can be experienced with one another, like a moment to a moment, a research project to an advocacy project to a course, right? To like our work with clients. So I think, I hope we keep naming the resistance that we're going to feel. I think Stuart brought that up, what that can look like in law. But I think the most important resistance that will stop us from this is the resistance that's internal and that's unspoken, that maybe we, I just want to, and I want to be careful to not go on a rant here, but it's just been on my mind as Siobhan has asked us to work on this project. It feels like, oh shit, like values, like we're going to touch these hallmark values. People are going to freak out. Then I was like, people like us, there are however many of us, 22 of us, it was real living human beings, not furry creatures, that created the values in the first place. And they were created out of a certain context, right? And so already we know what's happening as we move further and further away from May of 2020. We're forgetting left and right about like all the things we said we were going to do the summer of 2020. So that resistance is in myself, it's in all of us. And so I really think that that's our next step, is to identify what that resistance is telling us and how to make the work really meaningful, and that these values are about the counseling psychology we want to kind of see for the next, 20 to 30 years, as opposed to, because that's how long these values have stuck around, right? They got some staying power. So yeah, I'll pitch it back over to Mel.
Yeah, see, I told you. You just say she calls it a rant. I call it a mic drop, and to each their own, I guess. It tends to happen when Annalise speaks. Thank you so much for that. And thank you to everyone for your feedback. Truly, again, I know I've been short with my words tonight, which is unusual, like when I'm responding to y'all. But for one, I wanted to give you all time to speak, and also losing my voice a little bit. But really and truly your feedback, both verbally during your report outs and the discussion, and as we can already see on the Jamboard, is so helpful, so important. These are meant to be our shared values as a community. And so we can't do that, wouldn't want to do that without all of you. And we hope that you'll continue to participate in the discussion as well. All three of my Annalise and Della's emails are up on the slide. If you have further feedback, questions, you want to see the values again, please feel free to email us. And we also hope that you'll join us at Dr. Moore-Laban's presentation, our shared presentation on her presidential initiatives, both this and the living those values out loud. at APA convention in Washington, DC. That'll be Friday, August 4th, 9 a.m. Eastern to 10:50 a.m. on or at the convention center. And again, if you need that information, again, please don't hesitate to reach out about that as well. We don't take for granted that you've spent your Tuesday afternoon or evening, wherever you're coming to us from, with us. And I know you're all so busy. So thank you so much again for being here and for continuing to dream with us. And we look forward to continuing to do so with you all. Thank you.